My name is George Aluru. I'm the CEO of the Electricity Sector Association of Kenya. And in this third panel, third panel actually, we'll be discussing around the policy environment to kind of encourage more CNI developments in Africa. Quite a bit has been said in the morning that I am at the risk of repeating, but I think it really is important to first set the stage for what we are about to talk about. I have a brief presentation, which will take me maybe 10-15 minutes, then we'll proceed with the panel. So I think, as had been mentioned briefly in Geoffrey's presentation, the CNI sector, or the segment we call CNI, commercial and industrial, in Africa accounts for about 75% of the energy demand. So 75% is actually consumed by industries and what we call commercial in Africa. We have, of course, this is a number you all know, 600 million Africans do not have access to power. 65% of the new solar in Africa in 2023 was for self-consumption. This comes from a study from AFCIA, one of our actually partner associations. We are using approximately $20 billion a year in backup diesel generators across the continent. Nigeria alone, 14 billion a year on just fuel for generators. The generators consume 20% of the fuel that comes into sub-Saharan Africa. This is a 2019 study from IFC. And then 75% of companies in Africa experience 8 times outages, 8 times per month for more than 5 hours. This is from the World Bank. The backup generator capacity in sub-Saharan Africa, we estimate it at 45 gigawatt, of which 13 gigawatt is Nigeria. And I was actually telling our chair, we did kind of a outside desktop study for Kenya, I think 2 years back, and we're estimating about 5 gigawatt in standby generators in the country. If you think that the grid is 3 point something gigawatt, 5 gigawatt is standby generators. And of course, if you even walk into this hotel, you can just figure out how many kVAs of standby generator they have. So this is the context we are operating in. And I also wanted to give you just a bit of context in terms of what's happening in the other countries. South Africa. So South Africa faced this long period of load shedding. There were some coal plants that delayed, so they didn't have enough capacity to supply. So in 2023, after all this hue and cry, I think the minister then, first they moved from a cap of 1 megawatt for captive, then they went to 100 megawatts. Then eventually they just abolished the whole thing and said you can do whatever size you want. And because of that, over 9 gigawatt in private sector embedded generation projects are now kind of active there. About almost a gigawatt of solar has been added just in Q1 of 2025. And 80 megawatt in wind, which I think I wanted to highlight that particular wind farm that is supplying a mine and a chemicals plant. It's not very common that you hear of wind farms in captive, but it is happening. And of course, one of the biggest motivator of that is the ability to wheel. And then the wheeling framework was reformed in July 25. Now they have open access, non-discriminatory access to the grid, and of course, cost-reflective tariffs. It's a business-to-business basis, and you just pay the wheeling. And then 125% first-year capex deduction on renewable assets. This is like they introduce some incentives to ensure that they get a lot more of these power plants onto the grid. Then I think this I won't dwell too much on. It has been mentioned more or less. Our own captive journey has been accelerated due to this moratorium we had. So we had on and off moratoria for like 8 years. And in that process, EPRA, and I will give credit where it's due. I think EPRA has done a good job to enable the sector. And because of that, they have turned a blind eye on a few things, like what Engineer Okech was trying to say, that there are some levies to be charged that they just decided not to allow the sector to grow. And because of that, we saw some significant growth. Now we are at 630 megawatt. Not all of that is renewable. There's some that someone installed some kind of waste heat recovery system based off coal, but still we are at 630 megawatt today. We will become even bigger, as some, I think you are asking in your panel. If we are to get to that 10 gigawatt number, you want a data center that can consume 1 gigawatt, and there's someone who can possibly build a 1 gigawatt power plant close to that data center, and now connecting it to the other sum, who was talking about tier 4, I think, hyperscale data center. You want another option to get a gigawatt, maybe from the grid or someone else. Then you are able to have all these multiple sources. So captive power, I think what all of us agree, it has actually saved us from load shedding. If we didn't have that captive power in place in that period that it came in, we wouldn't have enough supply. We would actually be load shedding. If you think of it today, if we lose 630 megawatt, or if the grid suddenly experiences an increase of demand of 630 megawatt, at peak, we would have to load shed. Even if we took additional 200 megawatt from Ethiopia and we're now at 400, we'll still be having a shortfall of about 230. So captive power is not the enemy. It's a complementary kind of service, and especially focusing on the consumer. As Sam mentioned, we like to look at this from the consumer's point of view. Solar PV has been the main technology, and that's why I specifically mentioned the wind in South Africa, to just get us to understand that captive doesn't mean solar. Captive could be geothermal, could be wind, could be any other renewable technology. But for most of those other renewable technologies, you find that the resource is not located at the same place where the consumption is. Like, you won't put a wind farm just on top of the trademark and expect to get good wind. Good wind sites are far flung, far out. The engineers call it the roughness. The area where you are kind of allows for wind to flow freely. And that's far outside. So for that to happen, I think my ask would be to, through your office, Special Envoy, and maybe supporting also the regulator and the industry, we really need to get the electricity markets, bulk supply, and open access regulations passed, enacted. I know the draft is advanced. It has gone through the various offices of the state. We just need it done. We need that regulation in place, and then we have open access, and with that, a lot of things can happen in the market. The market will change significantly. So, and another story is Nigeria. They have 13 gigawatt on the grid. They can only dispatch 6 gigawatt of that. They have like 150 million people that are depending on this. They have 6.5 gigawatt of captive power. It's like about $25 billion in investments. Huh? And then they also have solar, and for them, since they also have their own gas, there's about 3 gigawatt of that is gas supplied. In just Q1, the same Q1 I was referring to in South Africa, they approved about almost 1 gigawatt of new captive plants. So you see now they are in a situation where it's captive or nothing, or generator actually. So we have a different motivation, but I think the goal towards enabling the industries, the consumers, is the same. So with that, I would want to welcome my panelists. I'll remove that so that it doesn't distract you. We have a panel of 3, so we decided to make it lean after we saw that you didn't get enough time to ask questions in the first panel. We have two physically here, and we have one colleague who's joining us online from Uganda. I would then want to welcome to the stage Eliud Muchina. He's the sales lead at Rolls-Royce Power Systems. So Eliud, karibu sana. You can clap for him as he walks up. And then we have Henry Rotich from Anzana Electric. So Henry, karibu sana pia. And online we have we have Dennis Kyagaba from the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development in Uganda. Eliud and Henry, maybe just introduce yourself. Tell us what you do and anything in relation to CNI.
I'm Henry Rotich with Anzana Electric. Most of you know Power. It was Virunga Power, and then in 2024 we rebranded to Anzana Electric. And we did this because of the evolving business which we are doing. Initially, we started as a developer doing hydro. And then we improved to distribution and transmission business. And currently we are operational in Kenya, Zambia, Burundi, and DRC. So our business is divided into two: baseload renewable energy generation, and we focus mainly on hydropower. And the second arm of the business is distribution and transmission. I'm sure most of you know Umeme, the private utility which was in Uganda. I think their concession expired. So we are setting up similar businesses in Burundi and in Zambia. Thank you very much.
My name is Eliud. I'm a sales lead at Rolls-Royce Power Systems. So our offices for Africa are based in South Africa. But 2 years ago, we opened a branch in Nairobi. And people think or ask, you really must be doing a bad job. We don't see Rolls-Royce cars around here. So as a sales guy, you are doing nothing. But just to dissuade that belief or notion, Rolls-Royce car does not belong to Rolls-Royce. It belongs to BMW since 1998. So we don't sell cars around here. So what do we do? So as a brief, Rolls-Royce Group, headquartered in the UK, has 3 divisions. So one is civil aerospace. So we manufacture engines for commercial aircrafts. Then we have defense. So we manufacture engines for fighter jets, naval warships, as well as some battle tanks on the ground. But I come from Power Systems. And Power Systems is a division of Rolls-Royce. Okay, it's a small business, but it's the most significant business. And here we serve across various sectors, one of them being power generation. So we provide prime power, either for grid or for standby market. So we manufacture diesel generators, gas generators. We also the silent powerhouse. Okay, not really the silent, but we are the powerhouse behind most of these equipment you see around. The mining trucks, the 300, 200 tons trucks, the Komatsus, the Hitachis. So we are the powerhouse behind them. We also serve across the rail business. So the locomotives, engines, we manufacture that. We are also into marine. So we power the ferries, the tugboats and such. So I'm happy to be invited to this event. And I will tell you more of how we support the captive power in the C&I space.
Thank you, Eliud. I think now we have Dennis available. Dennis Ogambachi, please introduce yourself.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be on this platform. Dennis Kyagaba is my name. I work with the Ministry of Energy and Development. From electrical power department. Our mandate is an oversight to all power system, entire national power system, especially distribution and transmission. I submit. Thank you.
Dennis, maybe while we are still with you, we've mostly been talking about Kenya, South Africa, and all these other places. Perhaps you could tell us from a Ugandan point of view, in terms of regulation and policy from the ministry, what are the structural barriers that you have encountered that prevent the further expansion of CNI in Uganda, or prevent these projects from actually reaching financial close?
Thank you. Thank you, moderator, for this opportunity. The question from the ministry or the standpoint, the constraints are not purely technical as such. They are majorly institutional, legal, and the market structure in nature. Diving into, I hope I have 2 minutes or 2. I don't know how many minutes I have, but I'll just wait for one side on the side of the regulatory framework. Uganda still lacks a full coherent captive power framework. Basically, you can in most cases, developers rely mostly on the mixture of the electricity act and the executive grid. Taking you back to our Electricity Act 1999, when you can look at it and examine it was originally designed for the it wasn't originally designed for the centralized C&I model. This basically led to ambiguity in licensing thresholds. There is an overlap between, in quotes, active mini-grid and embedded generation. So you could see that even the recent policy which we have done in 2023 acknowledges inadequate laws for captive power and some kind of electricity. This impact the impact on the financial costs. Basically, you see that investors and developers cannot clearly model the regulatory risks, this leading to high cost of capital. Second point, we lack the framework of the surplus power monetization, power vending. We categorically do not have a fully fledged regulatory from the bidding regime, as well as there's no clear excess captive power bid as well. So all of these, in their nature, there is a way they are creating this. There's a risk. It's one this creates asset risks, where system must be sized conservatively, and when you look at if you go by overseeing the systems, this can become unattractive, much as oversizing can lead to improvement of internal rate of return. From the project finance perspective, this obviously kills the upside revenue, and they of course definitely reducing the debt service coverage ratio. That's goodness as well. In Uganda, our licensing regime, I want to look at the licensing regime and transaction complex. You will find that various components of various systems. System, I mean the captive system. For instance, below 2 megawatts, you are okay. 2 megawatts is good to have a full license regime, and other are like those. But I want to focus on what they can categorize. Between 2 to 10 megawatts, typically where commercial industrial scale are, this would need full electricity regulatory authority licensing, environmental, environmental permits, as well as grid compliance approvals. This obviously may take longer for the whole part as well. So eventually, this result will exceed the project development timelines exceeds investment requirements as well. Not forgetting that even the transaction costs become disappropriate. Of course, we have many people, but we don't have. But in this case, we don't have. Government doesn't standardize the way multiple barriers for open access region because there's some restriction of currently transmission operator doesn't allow any or solar beyond the 250 megawatt. This all because of the grid reliability and resilience issues as well. However, at investor on the open space, we have issues with the curtailment risks or uncertainties of interconnection costs, as well as technical integration uncertainties for instance, for hybrid systems, which the developers they can look at well. Another aspect is land acquisition and project development friction. Land, on the side, the land acquisition and project development friction. Here, the land policy are not something which is cumbersome and weaker spatial planning and coordination. Lastly, but not least, weaker data and maybe planning transparency. You may find that because of some efficient profile, with capacity map, as demand forecast, this is so critical to the investors, which may need the predicted demand application models. So we both consider we are like it leads to poor visitor studies hence naturally and developer. Lastly, I want to mention that historically here we have some market structure constraints. As some of you may know that traditionally we have the single area model, which is to limit direct in an highlighted markets. So this and in the purchase agreements and industrial energy autonomy. So you may find that because of that backup, the current PPAs that are not necessarily suitably enhanced to make sure that the CI and so with those two, we have to submit to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis. And I think just listening to you, the issues are pretty much the same to what we are facing in Kenya. And perhaps in the next round, you could probably also give us an idea of like what's the level of installation in Uganda. But I hear the same things we face in Kenya. You're saying that ability to sell the surplus, land is an issue. And then you had I think you said 2 megawatt cap. So it's pretty similar to what we kind of experience also here in Kenya. And maybe just now moving on to Henry. You've worked in Anzana works in Uganda, in Kenya, in Burundi. Now, from a developer or investor point of view, what is holding back further development of captive power?
Yeah, thanks, George. I think this is the same question which was asked by Rono, if you remember. And Benina had the answer. You remember Benina? You actually shown it on the screen. If you can do the same, I'll appreciate. Because that's like, it's like when you are doing an exam and then you get a leakage.
More Kenya.
More Kenya, yes, that is. So, I will respond to the question in three fronts. I'll talk about regulations. I will talk about the customer, and then I'll talk about the cost of power. Thank you, Penina. That is exactly what I was looking for. So I will start with the customer. And this is from our experience as Anzana. Currently, we are negotiating with a mining company in Zambia for us to supply power. And our main focus is hydro. We have hydro projects we are developing in western part of Zambia and the northern part of Zambia. But Zambia is very expensive, and hydro is not, it's not like solar. You cannot do your hydro installation where the load is. So regulation becomes very important for us because we have to wheel the power from where we are generating to the customer. And in our case, it's actually more than 500 kilometers. Imagine. That's a very long distance. I think there is a problem. Oh, you can hear me. Yeah, it's a very long distance. And we are currently negotiating with CESCO on a wheeling agreement and a systems operation agreement. It takes time. It takes time. I think we started last year. We are still going on. And we are discussing very simple things like, wheeling charges, system operations charges, how to deal with balancing, how to deal with banking, things like those. And it's expensive because some of us, we operate from Nairobi, you travel, you come back, you can imagine. But it's the business. So what I can say, it's holding back captive power is the regulatory environment. And I know in Kenya we have the bulk supply and open access. I think it is recognized in the Act now, although it's not been implemented. But what I see is that, we have to prepare, especially the regulator and the authorities. They need to start on working on templates which are bankable, especially the wheeling agreements, the market access regulations, so that we move with speed. The other thing which I can say is what George said earlier, that captive power is being seen as, especially by the utilities. We are taking their lunch and we are taking the large customers. So there is resistance, but it should be seen in a different way. It provides employment. We will not, we can provide reliable power. We can attract large manufacturers and things like those. And the utility can still make their money by charging us wheeling charge and system operations charges. Now, when you look at the customer is another challenge, because getting a customer who is willing to sign a long-term PPA, a PPA for 20 years is difficult. Most private off-takers don't want to commit long-term. And therefore, it brings back again the issue of regulations. You need the market to be open to everybody. You need that access so that you have intermediaries who can come in as secondary off-takers, like Greenco in South Africa. You need also the cross-border connections, East African Power Pool. I know the CTK interconnector is coming in soon, which will help us a lot to connect to the South African Power Pool. And we can now allow trading within the sector. And, for us developers, bankability is very important. I always say the financing is available. Financing is not a challenge. The challenge is getting bankable projects. And bankable projects depends on the regulatory environment. It depends on the off-take risk and many other things which make the project makes sense to financiers. When we talk about cost of power, yes, it helps us in a way as developers in the captive power supply. In Kenya, as said by the regulator earlier, consumer tariffs are cost reflective. So it takes care of maintenance, operations, and the cost of bringing that power to your doorstep. So by it being cost reflective, it becomes expensive relative to our neighbors who subsidize power. We operate in Burundi, and I can tell you that you cannot do captive in Burundi because the consumer tariffs are very low. So at the end of the day, it's not attractive for captive power generation. But again, that power is not available. You get 12 hours of load shedding. You go to places like Malawi, Zimbabwe, Zambia. The news are not coming, but when you are there, when you are operating there, you see the challenges they are going through. 10 hours, 12 hours of load shedding. Of course, it's a blessing in disguise for us in Zambia because we now get the opportunity to supply the mines and they are listening to us. So in summary, we can actually say that, getting credible off-takers will help us, especially off-takers who can agree to sign long-term, and also off-takers who understand the business, because sometimes we demand for payment securities to bring the bankability issues. And we need what you can call first layer of payment security, like LCs or maintaining an escrow account, which is quite expensive. You are actually locking money somewhere. And regulation is of course important, especially for us hydro, because we have to will the power to the customer. And predictable charges, which can help us to model for a long time, for 20 years, 30 years, like that. And then we will be in business. If those things are sorted out, then captive power is here to grow. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe just a quick follow-up. The 500, you said 500 kilometers of line.
Yes.
Is the line existing? Is it ZESCO line? Or you're just talking of wheeling, or you have to build a portion of it?
We will build a portion of it, 50 kilometers, 66 kV, single circuit line, to connect. The point of connection will be a 132 kV substation, and that is what we are calling the injection point. And that power is transported by ZESCO using ZESCO network, and then it is withdrawn by the customer at the withdrawal end. So we have to agree with ZESCO on all those things, injection node and the withdrawal node, and other things like, the tolerance band, how to deal with inadvertent energy, and system operations in general, scheduling and things like those. So it's transported by ZESCO for almost 400 and something kilometers, and then it is supplied to the mine. And that brings in the issue of, balancing, energy banking and things like those. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. I think you've also mentioned a good point around us, and I'm looking at Dr. Mutua, around us also already having templates. We have been anticipating the regulations, but when they come, I guess we should move quickly. So already thinking of templates for all this contracting and stuff. I would want to ask the same question, similar question to you, Eliud, but now from a solutions provider kind of point of view. Where do you see this biggest disconnect between the policy and what the private sector needs? What government is offering and what private sector needs for CNI?
Thanks for that. So we work a lot with IPPs, and we see the challenge that they face. And one of them is unpredictable environments. You see, as an IPP, you want to invest in an environment where it's predictable. So because often there's a lot of work that goes into the visibility studies. You want to see how viable a project is. So if you go into an unpredictable environment where you don't know, maybe the policy will change. You've seen what happens in this country. Some few years ago, the IPP's projects were frozen. At times, the members of parliament are pushing for a review of tariffs, as much as these contracts, but then you see, at times they use other tactics to force you to reevaluate your tariffs. So unpredictability is one issue that private investors face. There's a mismatch because, I know the government is usually taking more concern about the welfare of the people. So at times, even when they are setting up their regulations, it's about the control and safeguards to the consumer. But then as an investor, you need a cost of, let's say, a return on your investment. And if I can give an example, with one case that we faced some years back, we were working with one IPP in Homa Bay. This IPP wanted to use the vegetation in the lake, the water hyacinth, to generate biogas and then push that into a gas generator and generate power. They were actually looking at 30 megawatts. And over 10 years, they had done a lot of studies around that because they need to see how much gas content they can find in that. They had also found that from that plant, they were going to get fertilizer, organic fertilizer out of it, and carbon dioxide. And they even went ahead to get off-takers for the carbon dioxide, for the fertilizer. And they were about to sign up an IPP with Kenya Power. And then the moratorium came and IPP's projects were frozen. And that project never took off. So 10 years of hard work, bringing, setting up a laboratory in Homa Bay and all that. So that's how an unpredictable environment can really affect an investor. Something also maybe he has mentioned is the bankability. You need, as from the onset, you need to know the return on investment on that. So you really need to have tight figures and everything in place before you can. Because if there are unforeseen risk, then that also affects any project. So you don't want to go to an environment where there are so many unforeseen risks which can come into the picture. Maybe another one is the speed of adoption. We've been told since 2014, the regulations around net metering were adopted, but until now, they have not been operationalized. We are also aware that they've been talking about guidelines on power wheeling, which are not there, which also affects the speed of adoption because, yes, the policies are there, the guidelines are there, but they have not been operationalized. So it affects on the speed of how you can execute a project. I'm sure you are aware about this West Kenya Sugar. They generate a lot of power in Kakamega in one of their plants there. Then they wheel that 33 kilometers using their own grid. They have their own line to Naitiri somewhere. But if the power wheeling regulations have been adopted, then they would not have to invest in a line. They would just have to feed the grid and that's sorted. So that's how it hampers the quick adoption. So the speed. So normally I know the government wants to put a lot of controls and the regulations. That's the interest of any government, to put a lot of controls and regulations. But what happens is it creates unnecessary hurdles and bureaucracy. And maybe we need a crisis like happened in South Africa. We've presented figures here. Why they got where they are is because there was a crisis. So in times of crisis, then you deviate from the norm and the speed is there, everything moves faster. Or the crisis in Nigeria is what is encouraging the figures you're talking about for captive power there. So maybe that's what we need to motivate or to facilitate this adoption. But yeah, that is usually the disconnect between what the private sector expects and what is the reality. Ground.
I like the suggestion that we need a crisis. I was of the same mind at some point, but I hope we can act without necessarily having to have a crisis. But I hear you. I want to go to the second round of questions and come back to you, Dennis, if you're still with us. First, just give us a picture of what is the installed level of CNI in Uganda. We know in Uganda now there's probably maybe 800 megawatt additional capacity on the grid from the hydros that is not being used. And then there's still people doing captive power plants, CNI. So how is the ministry and ERA, the regulator, how are you like balancing this kind of competing needs? What sort of policy instruments or regulations are you putting in place to still ensure there's some kind of space for the private sector to do the CNIs and also manage the apparent excess that you have in Uganda?
Thank you, moderator. I'm calling Nick. It's someone else. As for the ministry, how they navigating C and I growth like the grid, constraint, among others, artistic for full barrier intervention. The policy instruments that created real space for them, for their supply kind of stuff. Uganda has begun literally opening the packet. And this is where now the makeup is now the strongest. One, at least there is a organization of that sector. For the recent Electricity Act, as amended in 2022, is unbundling and the electricity sector, which introduced generation competition and power sector and private participation. This case brings me to the foundation whereby at least there's kind of an users and who has built confidence in the developing sector value chain. Regarding electricity, in terms of isolated grid systems, there's some regulations which are underway, where the ministry come up with some regulations for isolated grid systems to support the C&Is. There's license exemption, at least there's license exemptions, and this will get under this regulation, which simplify the administration of the systems, which in the report then cost the C&I. The business impact through this, at least we have proactive backup systems initially coming on board, and we're processing many grids as well as even industrial states as well. Another aspect is direct power purchase reforms. Like I have mentioned here, in the recent amendment of the Electricity Act, the Electricity Act is permitting large consumers, which are falling entirely under category of industries. Approximately greater than 1.5 billion for such industry which are falling under that category, that optional category, they can purchase power directly from the producers. At least this is a game, and that has introduced many things. As corporate PPAs, power purchase agreements, it has enabled this kind of framework has brought in bilateral contracting and cost optimization. Basically, in my view, you will see that this is arguable. When you argue this out the most important thing, it brings out the more important reform for C and I growth within Uganda, or basically for the last 10 years that way. Another aspect I want to look at is to use tariffs. Our act has defined various categories of tariffs for industry users. This has, by way of things, it has enabled load shifting and hybrid captive, as well as optimization. So you can see, at least it's not for investors and developers to come on board with intervention. Another aspect to look at is feeding tariff, refit or get fit. In this case, at least as everyone was from our panel, a standard is provided a standardized PPS, provided a standardized default purchase agreements and risk mitigation instruments. Though maybe on the other hand, it might indirectly support C&I, but to build some kind of investor confidence, whoever this kind of developer is interested. At least this has created a track record for project financing. Lastly, I want to allude to emerging policy selection, our energy policy 2023. In the last 2 years, we had to revise our energy policy, and explicit recognition of them of need for captive power frameworks, as well as integration with surplus generation. This has been a greater intervention for signaling the policy intent, aligning with the investors' need or even the developers' needs in terms of supporting them or even supporting commercial and industries. In that regard, I will do for those few comments I want to do. Thank you. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Dennis. Again, what I'm hearing is you just have like different licensing modalities for the different approaches, whether it's direct supply or mini grids, and also a tariff band that allows for CNI or CNI consumers, to access power at different rates. Thanks for that explanation. Coming now to Henry and Eliud, and this will be the last questions for now before we go to the audience questions. For Henry, I want you to give us a bit more nuance in terms of hydro. Most of us seated here understand captive power from the point of view of solar. So for hydro, what makes it work? What things are required for you to actually see hydro successfully integrated into captive power?
Thanks, George. I'm sure everyone appreciates the intermittency issues we have with solar and wind. Hydro sorts that problem. And it can be integrated through, I can say, 3 ways. One is that if your hydro resource is close to what we can call an anchor off-taker, like agro-processing facility. For example, the tea factories, which, the 5% we talked about captive hydro earlier in Kenya, that is mainly contributed by the KTDA and the tea factories. There you have the agro processor, which acts like an anchor tenant close to your resource. And that guarantees minimum offtake. The other way it can be integrated, of course, which I mentioned earlier, is through wheeling to where the load is. And that one requires the regulatory environment. It requires those wheeling agreements, system operations agreement, it requires predictable charges. Like currently in Kenya, we are working on captive hydro. If you talk about wheeling, the first question is, how much will KPLC charge you to transport your power from where your resource is to the customer? And that remains a blank part of your financial model. And when you go back to KPLC and say, okay, can you give us, what will you charge us for system operations charges and wheeling charges? I think up to now, we don't have a number. If I'm correct, George, we don't. And even the traditional IPPs where we sign PPAs with KPLC, of late, KPLC is proposing wheeling as a cure for early termination. And we're asking them, this wheeling policy, where is it? You know, it's a bankability question. And we've not gotten answers yet. So that is the challenge we have with hydro. Because hydro, you cannot do it at site, or you cannot do it near site, unless you are lucky to have an anchor off-taker nearby. So I think we can integrate it that way. And what can make it work is a credible customer. And what we've seen is that the challenge mainly is that most of the customers, like in Zambia, we are operating a mini grid, and one of our anchor customers is called Zambesi Pineapples, which is a agro processing company. At least they are giving us, they are taking substantial amount of the power we are generating, and we supply also other customers. I think we supply around 2,500 customers in the mini grid. And that is our captive power. Sometimes, you know, it helps. It can be seen by the utilities as, you know, taking their customers, but it helps to grow the economy. Recently, we just talked of expanding it, actually doubling it, our generation, hydro generation, and hybridizing it to solar. And so many other companies, agro processing companies, are coming up within the same region, which is helping. So basically, we can only integrate hydro through proper regulatory environment, through wheeling and agreements like system operations agreement. And if you are lucky, if your customer is close by, then that is how we can integrate it. Thank you. Thank you, George.
Thank you. Switching to Eliud. Now, I want you to give us a picture of what an ideal regulatory environment for CNI looks like. Maybe of the experience of the company in South Africa, just what is the ideal? Where now you have an ESCOM, you have all these people doing captive power. What kind of ideal framework allows for that to exist?
So I don't know whether it's an ideal, but we can talk about what people would think to achieve. And now talking about the experience of South Africa, you presented very good figures here. Before 2021, there was less than 1 gigawatt of captive power. And then for you to generate above 1 megawatt, you needed a license. Now that was pushed to 100 megawatts, and now you can generate whatever amount of power without a license. All you need is just have it registered with NASA, that National Regulatory Authority, the equivalent of EPRA in South Africa. So also what they've done is in South Africa, now giving an experience of South Africa, is the net metering policy is in place. So that also allows that people can sell excess power to the grid. The power wheeling is in place. So that's how that mine is buying wind power. So there's wind and it's transported to the mine through the grid, because that has been there are already regulations and guidance in place. But also another thing, also they have liberalized their distribution and consumption of power. In South Africa, they allow multiple companies or private companies to sell power direct to the end user. In like Kenya, where only Kenya Power is allowed to sell, in South Africa, private companies can also sell power to the end user. So you can see the whole infrastructure, right from generation. You've encouraged them to set up as many captive projects as possible. Then there's the net metering regulation, so you are sure about the tariffs that are applicable. Then there's the wheeling, which is already in place, all the way to the consumption side, where we have multiple off-takers and can sell to the end user. So this is more of an ideal situation. Of course, it's still not ideal, but that's what every other IPP can envisage, because it's, as I said, it's an unpredictable environment, and it's easy to plan around that. And that's what, has encouraged that. And maybe, I don't know, maybe this is more of, a question or an idea. When we talk about captive power, it's synonymous to renewable energy. But I don't know, is it that we don't encourage the use of fossil fuels around that? And maybe it's because I'm an interested party, because, we manufacture generators, diesel generators. But the easiest technology that you can deploy for any captive power is diesel generators. In Nigeria, out of the 6.5 gigawatts, almost 5 gigawatts is in fossil fuel, whether it's diesel or gas. Dagote is doing 1.5 gigawatts through natural gas, powering his operations in Nigeria. Right now, I'm busy with a mine in Congo, a copper mine. They needed 30 megawatts. But for them to get the captive power, the fastest technology to deploy was generators. So I sold 78 generators to one mine in Congo. So, that was just, I know, because everyone thinks captive power is renewable energy. But most of the captive powers around, the easiest way to deploy is around the use of fossil fuels. And because of the capex is lower, and then ease of deployment. And you've seen even in Kenya, most IPPs around the fossil fuels.
Interesting question, or interesting response, I would say. And maybe an opportunity for some of our members to tag along with him to that 30 megawatt place where he's selling the generators and support. But I think from your response, a kind of close to ideal environment is where you have many options. So you're talking about either selling to the municipal company that's selling to the consumer, willing to directly to another consumer directly, or also the possibility of willing. And I know within the Southern African power pool, of course, South Africa is the biggest consumer. So everyone will likely be doing a captive power plant into a South African company. But within the framework of the SAPP, you are able to push that power out through the SAPP lines to some consumer somewhere. But I appreciate also your comments on the thermal power side, and I will let the audience deal with you. So anyway, now we have come to the Q&A session. I'm not saying it to to scare him. He's just stating a fact that we experience in Africa. So it's not something to run away from. The better we see things as they are, the more we can see how to improve them. But we are now on Q&A. Please, if you have a question.
Thanks, George. Guy Dixon from Osprey Renewables. You said to point this at one of the panelists, but it's going to all of you. Sorry. I was in Zambia last week, and they've got about 1 gigawatt of coal that is currently under construction or being planned for construction in the next 2 years. We've had recently announcements here that there's heavy investment in LPG infrastructure being kind of going out for tender at the moment. So it's really to extend where that conversation was just finishing of what do we think the role is for dirty, effectively, energy sources for CNI customers, or should we be prioritizing actually getting Kenya's grid to a position where it can provide baseload, reliable energy to these CNI customers who can then supplement it with cheap solar power? So thank you.
I see, Guy, you've chosen violence. Next question. Any other question?
I think I would like to bring the conversation back to, responsible renewable energies, and invite Rolls-Royce to start adapting your engines towards syngas for biomass gasification, rather than selling truckloads of greenhouse gas emissions.
That was not a question, but I will take it.
It was an invitation.
Sorry, we are a responsible manufacturer. So, being a responsible manufacturer, what have we done? For our diesel generators at the moment, since 2023, you can substitute the diesel with HVO. By that, you cut emission by 90%. So, we are responsible. Our diesel generators which are going into the market, you can easily take away diesel and put HVO. I'm sure most of you know about HVO. It's hydro-treated vegetable oil. So, it's diesel that is obtained from biomass. So our generators right now, you can substitute. For our natural gas, we have natural gas. We also know it's dirty fuel. What we've done, you can substitute, and until now, last year, you could blend 90% natural gas and 10% hydrogen. Because we know hydrogen is the king, is going to the future. We are going to use hydrogen. And around that space, we're also selling electrolyzers for this manufacture of hydrogen. We also manufacture fuel cells. So we are a responsible manufacturer, and you can be certain that's why Rolls-Royce is up there.
Well, let me thank the presenters. Really very helpful information about what's happening and so on. And George, you did very well in providing the overall scenario. First of all, I have one request, and I want to put it to our chairman of Esak, and maybe JZ can also chip in. So the figures of the generators in Nigeria and so on, and you're right, every other building in our city and around our country has a backup solution, which is generators. I just wanted to see if Esak can help us in quantifying how much energy are they generating. I did hear 5 gigawatts for whether to Nigeria or Kenya. And how much is that costing? The total cost for our imports for hydro fuels and fossil fuels is about 6.2 or 6.1 billion US dollars a year. And I want to, if you can help us understand how much of that also goes to HFOs in generators and so forth. Now, regarding deployment, I hear what Eliud is saying, and I suppose originally, of course, there was the perception that renewables were not reliable because of intermittency and so forth. But I thought with the improvement of technology, particularly on BESS and the cost of the BESS and so on, in fact, deployment is actually much faster with renewables, PVCs and batteries. And today, really, with regard to the disruptions that we are seeing, I'm not sure whether it is actually tenable to continue relying on supply sources that can no longer be guaranteed. And so that mine, I sympathize with it because already the world is seeing how many parts of the world has already started reducing the use of that and affecting the generations and all that. So it's not reliable ultimately, and it is for sure that the available resources for our continent that we are not tapping adequately. It's our renewable resources. And of course, there's nothing wrong with Rolls-Royce and any other company to make businesses with what they're best at. But there's a lot of technology that can quickly be deployed. I have in mind, for example, hydrogen and dual fuel use. I'm informed that the train running from Winock to Elvis Bay or Swanscop, the port, is using dual energy, and that is possible. So I think it's time we start promoting different sources that is available locally in Africa than continue promoting things that are slightly beyond us and which can be disrupted.
We work with a situation called ground. So it's not that we know that's where the world is heading. We need to conserve the environment. We need to promote green friendly solutions. But yeah, the solution at the moment is what it is. But yes, what we do as a responsible manufacturer, then we look at how can we substitute what is already there, what is adopted, then we substitute that. So I started with diesel, what we are doing with gas, and we are really now big in hydrogen. We're actually the pioneers of these electrolyzers, just to make sure that people can generate hydrogen efficiently, what we call the green hydrogen and all that. So we are working around that space. We also manufacture batteries so that we assist our industrial customers to store energy for deployment when it's required. So we are already doing something around that. But then we work with the reality. That mine in Congo, the Chinese wanted it operationalized as soon as possible. There's no grid, and they had a 30 megawatts requirement. So we had to work with what we have. And that's how we supplied the 78 generators.
Okay, I hear you. And maybe the thought is around when you supply the 78 generators, is the assumption that you're just like selling units and leaving? Then it's up to them to figure out if Snell will bring the power or some IPP guy will come and do solar next to them, or is Rolls-Royce also like looking at you? Yeah, you tell them now you need this, we have this 78, you use them, but of course it's not the most ideal solution. We also have these other things with green hydrogen. We can put battery, reduce this, some sort of hand-holding them with a solution that helps them towards renewable energy.
I'm already aware now they are planning for a solar. So they're going to bring solar to the plant. So we are already working on that. It's somewhere in Kamoa, maybe for people's interest who are in the weed space or in the solar business, they can check the copper mine in Kamoa. They're already working around 30 megawatts of solar to replace the generators. But at that point, they needed to operationalize the mine.
Henry, perhaps you can now try respond to Guy's question. What's your view? And Dennis, you can also chime in from Uganda's perspective after Henry is done.
You know, it's like all the questions were going to Eliud. On Guy's question, yes, there is investments in LNG, investments in coal power generation, and most of them are going to be grid connected. And I want to be honest, that is why most private off-takers, like the miners in Zambia, are not keen to sign long-term PPAs. But the advantage in that region is the Southern African power pool, the cross-border market, which allows now secondary off-takers to come in for purposes of bankability in case of captive power generation. So what I can say is that, you know, if you look at the Western world, if you look at Europe, if you look at the US, there is what we call, you know, spot markets, day-ahead markets. I think we are heading there. I don't know by when, but what we know is that we are moving in that direction. And that will help us because, you know, if we have a proper regulatory environment and there is non-discriminatory access to the grid, and we can sell power across the border, then we should continue investing in captive power. The only problem is how we can structure the deals so that it becomes attractive to financiers to enable us to reach financial close. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, moderator. I would want to summarize by saying that I'm looking at 3 auto drivers for captive power project in terms of hope to commercial and industries. One, when I want to talk about improvement of government policy, infrastructure, this mean cost of capital, and compares improvement of technologies and within these three key drivers, you can have successful support and growth of CIA. If we can collectively as stakeholders rely into that's the conversation of the three: capital, infrastructure, technology and innovation, whether they put their
Yeah, and maybe before you respond, I confirm that we're actually interested in that study to figure out how much generator capacity we have, when, how much are they running, then seeing what we can do about it.
Yeah, on the LNG and LPG and coal, and we all know that as global community we have undertaken to minimize our emission reductions, and up to date we have 134 countries that have submitted their NDCs, and in those NDCs Kenya has submitted its NDC 3.0. Our commitment is to reduce our emissions by a certain percentage. Of course, our first NDC was 32%. The next one is 35%, and many countries. Of course, global emissions have been increasing. Unfortunately, of course, the global energy situation currently is in disarray, and many countries that have originally ruled out returning back to fossil fuels, particularly coal and gas, are now going back. I just read last night that Korea, Japan, and several other Southeast Asian countries are relating their coal facilities. But hopefully that is temporary, because ultimately the work that we need to do as global communities to address the biggest risk and the challenge to us all, which is climate change. In Kenya, you all know that the coal facility that we were trying to develop in Lamu was eventually put off because of the risks that the country saw. Ultimately, thanks to the civil society that have really worked hard to bring to the attention of the government that it is not practicable. But more and more countries are now falling back to what they have, which is coal, and so it's much more reliable. But at the end of the day, I think it is the renewables that's going to make a difference for all of us as a global community. In Kenya and in Africa, we have recently launched a program that we call Accelerated Partnership for Renewable Energy that is being supported by Germany and Denmark and other countries. And we think that is what is going to help us ultimately to address, because without addressing the emissions that continue to kill so many people and to impact our businesses, I think we will not succeed. So coal, gas, maybe temporarily, there may be transition, in the meantime, but ultimately it is renewable that's going to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I think with that we have finished our panel. Please, a round of applause for all our panelists. And I request the team to put Dennis in the background as we take a group photo.